as we say, that the title is Boss to Coach, the leadership shift that everyone's talking about. And my goodness, is it a shift? And it's a shift, I think, that people maybe not realizing how big that shift is. So just to give you an outline of where I'm going to focus the sort of content and the understanding is around three core areas. The first one, I'm going to look at the context, the new world in which we're now operating in, and which the shift has been created by. You know, you may want to change the word shift to change, and the world has changed immensely from what we knew, say, 5-6 years ago to what it is now, and it's moving at pace. So we're going to look at the new world of work. I know we've got a mixed audience here, so there'll be a mixture of HR professionals, coaches, and leaders. So I wanted to split that up and sort of look at it from an organisational HR professional perspective and give you some thoughts around things that you may want to consider or to make you aware of, you know, what the research is telling and what our clients are also telling us. And the other focus will be, what does that mean for you as a leader? What does that mean for you as an individual? What's that shift, that mindset shift that you need to make? And again, I just sort of clarified that that's not an easy shift for either the organization, for HR professionals, for leaders to make. So although I will sort of give you some overviews, I appreciate that these are challenges ahead and they're not easy challenges to address. But I hope, putting my pragmatist hat on, that we give you some ideas and shifts and habits that you need to start thinking about developing. So let's focus on the first area, the context, the new world of work. I think it's fair to say that we are living through some of the most disruptive times in history. You know, in COVID times, the Great Resignation, as it was called, has now turned into what everyone's calling the Great Rebalance, or another term that I'm hearing around is the Great Reawakening. People are realizing that there's a new world of work and we need to work differently. And with difference of working differently comes different leadership, different followership, which we need to adopt. The other thing on top of COVID is what was being called now the fourth industrial revolution, 4.0. You know, it used to be called, the steam revolution, great steam engines. Now with 4.0, it seems to be putting place into like a more binary way of approaching that. Whether that's for AI to make sense of, I don't know, but it's being called 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. In addition to those technological changes and those new ways of work, there's political uncertainty. So on a geopolitical stance, there's uncertainty. Whenever there's uncertainty, it creates anxiety and concern. Climate concerns, we're seeing the change of those, whatever your views are. Cost of living continues as a crisis for many. And sadly, as we're seeing constantly on the news, conflicts rage across the globe. On top of that, you know, it's not a phase of the change will stop. Change is continuous. And what people are now starting to talk about is not just the new world of work and how we as leaders need to adjust, but how technology is advancing at pace. And that's being called 5.0, the age of augmentation. Now, why is that important? That's important because it's going from machine only to a place where we're augmenting it into machine and human behavior. And that's being called the era of augmentation. And certainly when working with clients, I'm starting to see that coming into organizations and a different way that leaders need to operate. For example, I was with a client the other day where they had globally an HR team of 600 with augmentation of in creating effective leadership and AI. They've been able to take that down to 50 individuals. That's a huge change of the way they're operating, but also your cost model. And what do we mean by that? It's simply integrating the human with the machine. And that will require a different way, not only for organizations to operate, but also for us as leaders. And some fascinating research, which I found recently from Deloitte's, from the What's the Future of Management work and their human capital trends, which is available on their sites. The link can be seen there. I found this interesting. They're saying there's three main shifts that are starting to move within organizations. The first one is that leaders will need to develop, coach, and motivate and nurture people. Not only that, 5.0, optimizing human and machine interactions, but also creating an agile, innovative way of operating. And that means operating at pace, fast moving. What I also loved about this paper was the shift that they see happening, the from to. So from automation to augmentation, from standardization to personalization, from stability to agility, from not just focused on outputs, but on outcomes, and looking at control to empowerment, which we're going to unpick a little bit further, and then from predictability to potential. So those are interesting shifts, not just as an operating model, but as an operating system in the sense of how we operate and think, our mindsets as organizations, as HR professional, and as leaders. And those are the shifts that we need to accommodate and adjust, because these aren't shifts that will be nice to have. These are shifts that are being forced onto us. And if we don't align to those, then we will get left behind. But the other question I asked is, what's then the impact on people? We're very much making it organizationally focused, but what's the impact on people, on the human? And this I found very interesting, that the amount of change that is happening is huge. And the pace of change is increasing, as we can see with the blue line. But the research from Gartner, another great organization, shows that the level of engagement and desire and ability to change is reducing. I think many organizations, many leaders, many individuals are just change tired. There's change fatigue. It's change after change after change. So you start to see this deficit coming in where change is required, but there's just not the engagement or the energy to make that change. That's an interesting dilemma that organizations will face and that leaders will face. The other area that I'm hearing around, and certainly getting people where they're feeling this, is what's being known as the great flattening. And this is being, in my view, this is being sort of covered as cutting layers of management in pursuit of speed and efficiency to get rid of the bureaucracy. From my perspective, I think that's about just getting rid of the cost. But what they don't think about is the cost on the human and the impact that's having. And there's some more research from Korn Ferry's workplace survey, where they said 41% of companies are flattening, whatever that flattening means for you. But then 37% of people are feeling directionless, without a leader. What I'm also seeing is that managers are being asked in this flattening not only to do one role, but two roles, and some even three. Or not only look after their current team, but with those different roles, to look after more individuals, to coach, to develop, to nurture. So there's coming a real pressure on leaders. We're trying to cut costs, trying to get a lot more out of the system, out of humans, for a lot less. So the great flattening is also having an impact on that shift that leaders need to make. And what that's leading to, as research would show, is burnout. And certainly in the last 6 to 12 months, what I've heard a lot of clients that I work with is that they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to get through the day. They're not thriving. They're not being able to play their best game. They're just trying to get through the day. And that is leading to an element of burnout, which, again, this is a UK orientated report. Recent though, came out this year, and you can see the costs that this is having from their perspective on the UK economy. So you put that into your organization, the cost of burnout and those ways, those shifts that are costing. The other piece, which is quite alarming, and again, another great organization, Gallup, in their brilliant document, which they release every year, State of the Global Workforce, the UK engagement level is 10%. That means that only 10% are highly engaged compared to other countries across the globe. And again, low engagement leads to a significant cost. People will not give that discretionary effort. People will not want to provide more innovation. They'll get by. They'll be as good as they need to be just to survive. So we need to be conscious of those things. And this is reinforced by another employee engagement survey, which within that was quite shocking. So first of all, the number one issue for employee engagement still remains poor management. I find it interesting they call it poor management rather than poor leadership. For me, it's that people aren't able or don't have the time to lead effectively. And one of the challenges that maybe they continue to manage, and we'll look at that further on. The other horrible stat, frightening stat that I noticed in this report was 85% of new managers get no form of leadership training. So we're asking you to step up to lead people, to get the best out of those individuals, but we don't give you any support or training. And that's 80% of new managers do not get support from that. So that's the sort of context, and I think the challenges that we're all facing, whether that's at an organisational level, a leadership level, or a human level as individuals. So what does that mean for HR professionals? What does that mean for senior leadership teams? Well, for me, it's quite simple. The water is getting hotter, and if you don't realise that the world has changed and is changing at pace, then you're going to get left behind. You're going to get boiled, using the boiling frog analogy. Change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. We're going to be moving in that direction, whether you like it or not. AI will need to be integrated. I don't think people understand AI enough and how they can utilize it, but it will be something that puts pressure on organization. It will also need a new mindset shift, not just from leaders, but from HR professionals and senior leadership teams. It's not a skill set shift alone, it's a mindset shift. And that mindset shift, as we'll explore now, is one from moving from management, from boss, to coaching, to coach. And that's where we come in to really understand, what do we mean by boss to coach, and that leadership shift that everyone is talking about and needs to be talking about. So what does that mean for priorities? Well, and again, Gartner came out 2025. They identified the 5 top priorities for HR professionals and for HR leaders. Leadership and management development is going to be key. Adjusting the skill set and that mindset to that new way of operating. Adjusting the organizational culture. So not just doing this at a leadership level, changing the systemic approach that organizations take, which is called cultural change. And as we all know, that's hard enough, let alone with the additional challenges we have on top. Strategic workplace planning, working out how you can do that flattening and prioritizing where you can get best returns and make it sustainable for people. Change management obviously goes with organizational change, and HR technology. How do we incorporate that augmentation between machine and human interaction? So again, some really interesting data that's coming forward there, and they give you some indications around how you might do that. So why do we have a problem? And we do have a problem. The new world of work is here, and it's landed fast. And I think it's caught a lot of individuals and organizations out. System development around IT and other things, many are still catching up. They're not even at 3.0, let alone 4.0, let alone 5.0. And many leadership programs and leaders do not have the right skills because it's changed so quickly. And as we all know, it's hard to change habits. And that's what we're having to do. We're having to upskill and change a mindset. It's a cultural shift. And many people and organizations, from my perspective, are still stuck in the old world mindset. And that's both leaders and HR professionals. And reading this book recently that's just come out from Harvard Business Review and professors from Harvard, I love this quote. It's about competing in the new world of work. It's definitely worth a read. But the quote in there is, "We cannot go back to work," which many of us have done. We need to go forward to work, because going forward to work requires a new mindset. It requires us to operate differently, and that's what's required. But going forward to work rather than backward to work requires a personal transformation, and that in itself is hard. I'm trying to do the day job. I'm trying to lead effectively, coach, manage effectively across a number of individuals, but I'm also having to change myself and also help the organisational change. And we've seen some of the challenges around that change deficit. So what does that mean for leaders? What does that mean for the individual on the ground having to lead their teams through that transition and into that new way of operating, going forward to work rather than back? Well, this model, which I showed earlier from the Deloitte's Global Human Capital Trends, really shows that. But one of the areas that I really want to focus on, which is a big shift for many leaders, is going from control to empowerment. And I think empowerment is an overused term for many. But that's what we need to be doing for leadership. We need to be empowering. Now, the interesting thing is around wanting to empower, and people want to be empowered, is with empowerment comes accountability. And what I'm finding is, although people want to be empowered, they don't want to be held accountable. So this is an interesting dynamic that not only are we seeing from leaders, but by followers. And in coaching terms, I guess, from when we're coaching the coachee, accountability goes hand in hand with empowerment. But if you start to hold me accountable, then I'm going to accuse you of micromanagement. So it's a really interesting tension that's starting to grow as a challenge for leaders, but also shifting the mindset of followers, of our coachees, because they need to develop and adopt in the new way of operating. And with empowerment, as I say, comes accountability as well. And I think that new mindset that's required, but also those new expectations that individuals within organizations want from their manager, is articulated brilliantly with this Gallup document, which again is a sort of the from to. Yeah. So this shift. In the past, individuals wanted a paycheck. Now they want to be focused on my purpose. And they want organizations to be purposeful, especially the younger generation. It's not just about the financial gain that I can get. I will only work and contribute if I feel we're doing purposeful work. The other piece, it's not just about satisfying me, it's about focusing on me and my development. And that's not a one size fits all. I want standardization to individualization, as we saw in the Deloitte's piece. I want you to support me specifically to my needs and adjust your approaches in developing me and helping me to make that shift literally on a one-to-one basis. Now, that's an interesting question to ask, is how will coaching support that shift in individualization and one-to-one on a cost base, let alone a time base? People are also wanting more of a work-life balance, as the old language is called. So it's not about my job now. This is about my life. And I want a balance that accommodates both of those. And that's becoming more and more important for individuals. And I don't want you to give me an annual review where we just catch up once a year. I want ongoing conversations. Yeah, I want to feel supported. I want to feel like you're developing me on an ongoing basis. Again, this talks so much into from the boss to the coach. And I don't want you to highlight my weaknesses. I want you to realize my strengths and develop those. So all of these things are shifting. And I think the biggest shift for leaders is moving from my boss or a manager to a coach. And the way that I like to articulate that is slightly differently. And I'd like to sort of give you an understanding around the workplace context of that and what managers need to be thinking and doing differently. So we've got a mindset shift, which is from my boss to my coach. What I like to call it is shifting from leadership management to leadership coaching. And let me explain that. So as a line manager, and in itself, I find that an interesting title because line manager is authoritative. I manage a line, a reporting line. You report into me. Listen to the authoritative controlling element of that, moving from control to empowerment. It sort of keeps us in the control phase rather than shifting to empowerment. But for me, line managers wear three hats. They wear a hat of a leader, they wear a hat of a manager, and they wear a hat of a coach. Leadership is about articulating a game worth playing. It's about the what and the why. Managers about the how we do this, but very much from if you like, an authoritative position. It's the rules of the game, the boundaries, the policies, the process that I need to manage and make sure that you follow. And then keeping with the game analogy, coaching is very much around helping me play my best game. It's about that individual development. It's about that individualism. It's about helping me be the best version of myself and allowing my strengths, my potential to flourish. And at the heart of this model is performance, or we used to put performance here. What I'm noticing now is that many organizations, individuals are struggling to continue to perform at that high level. So the language that I'm starting to see come through, and I think is really important for leaders to appreciate, is not just performance, but what is sustainable performance? What's sustainable performance for me as the follower, as a human being? What's sustainable? Obviously, what's sustainable for the organization for the bottom line, and what we're seeing with the ESG agenda coming in, what's sustainable for the planet? So sustainable performance is something that we need to focus on. Otherwise, if we don't make it sustainable, we will burn out people, and we're seeing that come forward. So we need to step back and just ask that question. It's not just about performance anymore. It's about sustainable performance, which is purposeful and going to be here for the longer term, not just for the next quarter. The other hat that I sort of am hearing people, certainly with the sort of the great flattening happening, is that you're asking me to lead, manage, and coach and do all those three things as a line manager, but you're also asking me to play the game. So I have to do a job which is playing the game, along with helping others to play their best game and give that direction. So I'm being pulled as a leader in many directions. But coming back to those three hats, the key thing here is that you need to find not only a sustainable performance, sustainable ways of operating. And that requires a balance of all those three hats. And I call this the three-legged stool of performance, sustainable performance. But when I ask people to tell me how much of their time do they spend with their management hat, so line managing from a place of, if you like, authority and control and rules, without fail, they come back and they tell me that they manage 80% of the time. And this is reinforced by research in that Deloitte paper, and they break it down very neatly to show where line managers are focused in their time. And it comes in at just under 80%. But qualitatively, people tell me 80% of the time they're wearing that management hat. So they're leading from a management perspective, from a leadership management perspective. Now, what's interesting here, if you put a line down the middle, When we're leading from the left-hand side, either, for instance, leadership management, then we have the power. And therefore, we're leading from a perspective where we're disempowering people because we're controlling. And I call this approach leadership management. And this is the shift that leaders need to make, because that approach is the old way. And I think the old way is broken. And although it worked in the past, it's going to stop working going forward. It's not agile enough. It's not empowering enough. It takes too much control away individuals. And if we need more from individuals, we need to empower them to get them more engaged, to enable them to be more innovative, more creative, get them thinking for themselves. Therefore, the shift we need to make is over to the right, where the focus and default is leading from a coaching perspective. Now, what I'm not saying is that you don't need to manage. What I'm saying, though, is leaders need to learn how they get that in greater balance, and ideally have as their default their coaching hat on, so they can interact with people from a coaching perspective, have coachable moments, coachable conversations on an ongoing basis, rather than managing it and constantly telling people what to do. Because that leadership management approach is very much around command and control. And command and control worked in the old world. It's not going to work in the new world. And we need to shift to a place of leadership coaching where we create a more connected and collaborative way of operating with those that we lead. And I'm entitling that leadership coaching. Gallup calls it from boss to coach, but it's definitely the shift that we need to make. And on top of that, other research has shown that connected piece and collaborative is connecting at a human level. So another term that you might hear about that shift that's having to be made is to a more human-centric way of leading. Focusing on the human being, not treating a human like a machine, a human doing. So the shift is from human doing to human being to create that more human-centric, emotionally intelligent, empathetic, authentic way of operating. So we've realized this for many years, that this shift has had to happen. And when you make that shift, the benefits are huge. So as I say, we've created the Leader as Coach program specifically to help leaders make that shift from leadership management to leadership coaching and a more human-centric way of operating. So in summary, that shift, the from to, requires not only a new skill set, but a new mindset, a new operating system within the organization and within the leadership population as well. So it's from command and control to connected and collaborative. It's from leadership management to leadership coaching. It's from human doing to human being. And on a technological level, leaders understanding how they go from automation to being augmented within AI and the technology of 5.0. And I love this quote from Professor Nick Kemsley. He said, we need leaders to actually stand up and say, I'm not part of the old system. I'm part of the new system. What he's saying there is we can't go back to work. We need to go forward for work. And he's quite right. The whole organizational setup, the way we operate as leaders, the way we operate as organizations with a operational system, it's a very powerful time, changing times. And we need to start thinking about how we move to that to keep up. So the new world of work, it's here to stay. AI will need to be embraced and integrated into the way that you operate and your leaders operate. Hybrid and virtual ways, that for me, that's old school now. That's just a given, although we're seeing some people shift back. The power's shifted from the employer to the employee. There's more being required from less, from the great flattening. Yeah, so low cost base, but they're wanting the same, if not more. Sadly, employment engagement is dropping. It's at its lowest, 10%. Silent cracking, what it's been called, or burnout, is increasing. And a new leadership style, a new way of leading, is absolutely demanded. It's not a nice to have, it's demanded. And in summary here, just a bit of a wake-up call for everybody. The pace and impact of change is phenomenal, and it's not showing any signs of slowing down. People find themselves, your leaders find themselves challenged as never before. So it's important as HR professionals, as coaches, as leaders, to learn to transition ourselves through that and support those that we lead or those that we coach through that transition as well. Because sadly, as we all know, change has no stop or pause button. It keeps going. And for me, leadership development, the creation of future fit leaders, must be your number one priority. And I believe coaching will play a key part in that approach, whether that's developing a coaching style of leadership or being supported by a coaching approach for your individual and personalized development. And that is the leadership shift that everyone is talking about and needs to talk about.